Welcome to Underworld UK, where Britain's darkest stories are brought to light. From the gritty streets of gangland London, Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham, from Curtis Warren to the Cray twins to county lines and modern day true crime, we cover everything. Bringing you new videos every week. Subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next video is put out.
Billy Hutcherson, he was combined service champion, like the RAF, the Navy and the Army, and he was fantastic, like, and he used to take me for runs 6 or 8 miles, like, he was fantastic. It's fitness, really.
You
It's
had an
fitness.
ability to take pain though, didn't you? Which not
Yeah,
everyone
I
else
didn't.
did. So
Yeah,
on
I
street
didn't.
fighting,
Yeah.
you could take weapons and everything.
Yeah, sometimes I could take a beating, like, and give me a little while, like, I was probably enjoying it. And they'd wear themselves out.
Right, yeah.
And then I'd just come back and give them a good hiding, like, you know.
I used to hear stories about it when I was young, teenage. He was fighting 4 men, attacked him with hockey sticks, and they broke his arm. He carried on fighting with a broken arm.
I broke my
Beat
jaw.
beat on.
Picture a man, he's tall, not excessively so, standing at about 5'11" in shoes or trainers. However, this man is a spitting and growling street brawler, and when he loses his rag, he grows another 6 inches and takes on the power and energy of a rhino with a needle. His shoulders stretch out wide to take on the girth of his colossal head and are big enough to fill the widest of nightclub doorways. At first glance and from a distance, our man looks like your typical street-walking geezer, but when he moves up close and fills your space, the light from the street lamps will very quickly become obscured by his frame, and only the faintest glow will be seen sneaking out from the edges. Imagine the comic book style British bulldog. Yes, you've got it, that big bruiser of a mutt with a packet of senior service ciggies rolled up in the sleeve of its Union Jack vest, and there you have him. That's our man, the obligatory bulldog of great British stamp, the prototypical face on every 80s footy fan's rolled up newspaper cosh. This is the face of fearsome loathing, the screwed up and threatening imagery of everything post-punk Britain hoped to have left behind. However, he ain't all bad. Oh yes, his bite is definitely worse than his fucking bark, but he can be a lovable and kind-natured geezer with a quality unfamiliar in a 20th century street brawler. He'll help you out if you need a leg up, and as Fred says, he'll give you a few bob if you're down on your luck. I mean, he's never been one to bite the hand that feeds, but he'll tear your fucking arm off if you give him unwarranted grief. He's run doors to protect the frightened and has minded the weak, vulnerable and weary. He'll put his life on the line to protect you and he'll bully the bully who tries to get at you. He has kids in schools who love him, who think he's Santa in a pull-on grizzly bear suit. He's the geezer that everyone runs to and the one who wrongdoers eventually look up to. He's put many on the right path who are swaying and pulled good out of bad from those who are failing. He's the godfather of Aylesbury, the lovable lunatic with a key to the town. He's the Guv'nor. He rebukes the heathens and is everyone's friend for all the right reasons. So, let us introduce you to our man Norman Buckland, or Stormin Norman as he's known to those who are on familiar terms with him. For 30-odd years he was known as the Guv'nor, and on the streets and in the pubs and clubs that was how the majority referred to him. And it was true. Well, it was at least, if that term means a man for the people, a man who would be there by your side through thick and through thin. If that was the case, then he was your man. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, he was a respected fist fighter with a solid pair of hands to protect you. Stormin Norman was the Guv'nor, a moniker that was born out of the initial nickname of Bruiser, a name that was gifted to him from his late father, Alfie Sr., who himself was a respected governor of his manor. From the Bucklands and the Coopers came a long line of fist fighters. He had Gypsy Jack on one side and Grandad Bucky on the other, both of them short in stature, yet tasty as fuck in the world of fist slingers, not to mention both being accepted and rejected in certain walks of life. Gypsy Jack fought the greats on the 19th century unlicensed scene, and his Grandad Bucky fought at the fairgrounds and horse fairs, for which they were equally accoladed. These men would fight any man, any time, at any destination, and this was the bloodline he sprang from, a character trait he was aware of from the very first day he held his hands up to fight. These tools were a part of him, it was in his bones and in his blood, and there was nothing he could do to rebuff it. Apparently, after doing a number on one geezer, Norm's great-great-great-great-grandfather served 6 months in prison, although it was said that as soon as he was released from incarceration, he immediately returned to the fight game, and with his newfound notoriety for sending his latest opponent off on a day trip with The Undertaker, fear swept through any potential rivals like the plague, not least his forthcoming opponent, Cabbage, or Stephen Strong to give his birth moniker. Stephen, or Iron Arm Cabbage as he was more bafflingly known, was trained by the great Tom Cribb from Bristol and Tom Belcher, so to say he was a well-oiled fighter is underplaying it a bit. Norm's granddad Bucky told him that this Cabbage geezer, although older than Gypsy Jack, came out for the fight all guns blazing and began smashing a granny out of him. He said that he'd even dropped my great-great-great-granddad on his fucking head, and it was that bad the crowd thought his neck was broken. He also told Alfie that this punishment went on for about 20-odd rounds, but then apparently, for a second time, he tried picking him up and grappling with him, but Jack, being a lot stronger, overpowered him and smashed a devastating shot into his temple which instantly floored him, and that was that. It was all over, with Norm's great-great-great-granddad the victor.
It was at this point in the story it became quite clear that Norm's power and will to take a beating had been passed down from Gypsy Jack Cooper. In his heyday, Norm was about 6 feet plus tall and weighed in at around 22 stone, and Gypsy Jack was just a light middleweight who stood about 5 feet 9 inches in height and was of slight build. Also, we don't know how true it is, but it is believed that to make himself appear taller, he stood on his tiptoes. Mind you, in 1800 and summit, at 5 feet 9 inches tall, you'd have been looked upon as a giant. But anyway, no matter what size or bulk Norm's great-great-granddad happened to be, he was an awe-inspiring fighter, and just like Norm, he was equally as dogged. Anyway, according to Norm's descendants, Gypsy Jack disappeared from London. Legend has it he was put on a boat and shipped off to Australia marked "Do Not Return." However, to be honest, no one really knows the truth, so let's just say it lies deep within the Buckland Cooper Romany legacy. Norman began life as a nice boy, a kind-natured little ruffian who just wanted to be loved, and he had no reason to bite. That was until life saw things differently for him and promptly threw a few obstacles in his way, at which point he had no alternative but to fight for what he thought was right. Now, most people would run off and hide. Most people would cower in the hope of becoming momentarily invisible. Not him. He was built from gypsy blood, and in the silent set of values that were ingrained in his brain, the only thing he knew how to do properly was to growl, snarl, and hit back at any aggressor. And unfortunately for the wrongdoer, he got fucking good at it, and on every occasion he hit out with devastating power and ferocity, and it were too late. They were done. Beaten, bashed up and broken, and there was nothing anybody could have done to stop it. Oh, except one thing maybe. They could have left him alone in the first fucking place and no one would have got hurt. And for the rest of his existence, that's exactly how he would have liked it. But that's not what the big man upstairs had planned for him, which is something you will very quickly find out as you flick through the pages of his life. So the book stopped in Buckinghamshire, for this was the county where reputed yet lovable fist fighter and hopeful light heavyweight boxer Norman Buckland's forebears chose to plant their family coat of arms. A market town that would one day witness the dawning of Stormin Norman Buckland, as he, with his overwhelming yet enigmatic demeanour, graced the streets like a prowling lion, duty-bound to seek out unruly outlaws with the hope of setting them on the straight and narrow, affording them a more gratifying pathway to tread. You see, during the time of his youth, Stormin Norman, or the Guv'nor as he is respectfully known, was himself somewhat of a disorderly life force, and instead of opting for a 20-foot sheet of governed canvas, he chose the avenues and alleyways to utilise his craft, because at this time in his life, an adrenaline-fuelled Norman saw accolade in the words spoken among the chaps over that of testimonies set by the hierarchy at the British Boxing Board of Control. Born from fine gypsy stock of considerable renown, Stormin Norman fought for honour against the toughest in the land and brought fresh hope and a sense of dignity to a governor-sized mitt full of failing adolescents who had fallen by the wayside and wound up at Her Majesty's pleasure, a place that would, as a rule, present them with adequate tools to further their criminal dexterity. but not with the Guv'nor at the helm of the class, because with our man at the helm, the mantra would be for positive progression and a more plentiful life. The case in point being, one young man Norman took under his belt, Matt Legg, a wayward boy with no sense of direction, who in the rise of the 90s was heading directly for despondency and degradation, only to be schooled by our protagonist, and who would one day don a pair of 18s to fight the fight of his life against Olympic champion and soon-to-be British heavyweight champion of the world, Anthony Joshua.
In the eye of the storm of the late raving 1980s, Norman and his brothers, chosen by fate, fought toe-to-toe against the country's finest, and like gladiators of the modern day, though battered, bruised and fading, always came home to tell the stories of how they prevailed. During his time spent in 1,000 roughhouse brawls, Stormin Norman very quickly discovered that his bark was equally as effective and intimidating as his bite, and this hands-off device would often stop in its tracks the nastiest of barroom brawls. Pull a knife on the Guv'nor and he will instantly dispatch you and your tool and send you back to school. And in a ploy to put out a fire before the flames licked higher, Norman would ease you out with his overbearing and kindly manner, putting you back in your box without a fist being flung. In later years, as he approached half a century, Norman took to the ring for prize-fighting fame and beat every man jack of them that were foolish enough to step up into his space. And with added captivating notoriety, Stormin Norman's Ringside Escapades echoed up and down our green and pleasant land, and a tsunami of documented anecdotes became the talk among many barroom males, as Stormin Norman's vocalised declaration, "Who's the Guv'nor?" very quickly set sail. Today, in his 50s, Stormin Norman, with knife wounds and a shrapnel-filled chest as badges of honour, has decided to settle down. Accompanied by his soulmate and sister-in-arms to guide him, Norman has chosen to cast aside his fists-for-hire CV in favour of a more harmonious and comforting existence for him to settle into. A polar opposite way of life to that of the one of prominence and allure that he once led. And as you read Norman's story, you will very quickly realise that this terrifying, growling teddy bear could be 1/3 of all of those parts, but the fact of the matter is this: the decision would be yours as to which one of those parts you chose to unleash. As part of the narrative, and to set certain records straight, the text below describes how we see Norman's place in the world of unlicensed and bare-knuckle fistfighting. In and among the unaffiliated fighters of the 20th and 21st centuries, there have been many prize-fighting Guv'nors, Roy Shaw and Lenny McLean being two of the most recognised and featured in broadcasts. Roy, with a sawn-off and a prayer, went to work with a Robin Hood mentality as he pinched from those in clover to line the pockets of a lawless community. Not to mention his prison capers that almost brought on his lunacy, requested and liquid cosh injected by the whitecoats at a well-known infirmary for the criminally insane. Next came McLean, with his self-stated, albeit disturbing, prerequisite for violence. Now this man was of a different time altogether. McLean walked the streets of East End London like a star from film noir, an oversized Rocky Sullivan from the old film Angels with Dirty Faces starring James Cagney, but with malevolence coursing through his veins. In contrast to Roy Shaw, Lenny McLean only teetered on the cusp of the criminal underworld as he worked as a money-getter for the gangsters of the time, an enforcer for the retrieval of monies owed that had supposedly fallen by the wayside. Which brings us to our third successive, although not final, Guv'nor, Stormin Norman Buckland. Now this Guv'nor, who currently holds the Roy Shaw EBF Guv'nor belt, is a mix of the two, but with Santa Claus thrown in to balance out the scary side. This Guv'nor fought a similar fight to Roy and Len, but for a whole host of different reasons. You see, Stormin Norman never once courted violence, but like a challenge to a gladiator, the gauntlet was simply thrown down in front of him, and on most occasions, Stormin Norman and his brother had no choice but to fight for their lives and for the honour of their family name, a name that is inked for all to see in the historical transcripts of the Romany. From an early age, and partly due to circumstances, these two mighty Buckland brothers were thrust into a way of life with a totally different ethos. And from that day to this, Stormin Norman and his brother Alfie felt propelled to hone in on their God-given talents and help the needy, while inadvertently guiding the socially inept and unruly.
And as the years fell away, the family name Buckland became equally as ubiquitous as that of their champion fist-fighting great-great-grandfather, Gypsy Jack Cooper. Now, if that ain't a verbal straightener that stakes a claim to what Norman has earned, I really don't know what is. Anyway, all of the above is in the past for him now, so let's get on with what's important, his story.